Hi guys, when I first heard that Andrea Jenkins would be running for mayor under a Reform UK banner, I thought to myself, she can't win. Don't people know that she's a nut job? Don't people remember her idiotic and frankly embarrassing behaviour as a Tory MP? Nobody would be dumb enough to put her in a position of real power. How stupid I was. Jenkins won the mayoral seat with close to 40,000 vote majority, and those who elected her are in for a bit of a surprise. So with Reform being a one-trick pony, that of immigration, Andrea has been talking about what she would do with asylum seekers, and it involves sticking them all in tents. However, this position is so crazy that even Reform-friendly GB News had to push back. When asked to clarify a few things, the new mayor of Greater Lincolnshire tied herself up in knots. Have a listen to this.
What world will the good people of Greater Lincolnshire want 10 refugee camps in their backyards?
No, I'm not talking. I'm talking about as they come across, as they have it in France.
So down in Dover?
Well, yeah, I'd do that.
I would do that. Okay, do you know that it's about a 4-hour drive from Lincolnshire to Dover? It's quite far away. So I'm not sure what influence Andrea Jenkins has over councillors in Dover, in Kent. Maybe there's cooperation, and those councillors will, yes, well, Andrea Jenkins wants us to put asylum seekers in tents, well, we're going to do that. Like, it started out as, in Greater Lincolnshire, Andrea Jenkins was going to put asylum seekers in tents. And this is such an insane position. Like, there are people even on the far right who are against this. Why? Well, for the optics of it, because they don't like the idea of walking around and seeing asylum seekers in tents in doorways or along the street or in parks or wherever. They're against the idea of asylum seekers in the country in the first place, these people, but they're certainly against the idea of seeing them around. And of course, if they're in an ex-hotel or in an ex-army base, they're somewhat out of sight and out of mind. But if they're in the street, in a tent, that's a recipe for disaster.
Why would the good people of Dover want tents and refugee camps on their doorsteps?
Also, I mean, Reform's correct that we must come out of the ECHR so we can start pushing people back.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so you were asked about tents in your city, and you said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to ask the people of Dover to put people in tents instead. And then when you're asked, okay, well, why would the people of Dover agree to this? And your response is, well, we're going to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Like, how are any of these things connected?
I mean, what I really don't understand is that we've given millions, and even when I was Conservative MP, I challenged the government on this, giving millions to France. They leave a safe country to come to another safe country.
I totally agree with you on.
Oh my goodness. They're not leaving a safe country to come to another safe country. They're not leaving France. They're passing through France. They're not French citizens. I was going to ask the question, does Andrea Jenkins know this? But clearly she doesn't. Andrea Jenkins doesn't seem to know a lot of things. And unfortunately, she was elected to a very senior position, a very important position, a position of power. And she doesn't know the difference between asylum seekers and immigrants. She doesn't know the difference between Lincolnshire, it seems, and Dover. She doesn't know what the European Convention on Human Rights is. Oh my goodness.
So with France.
I totally agree with you on that. But in what world will the people of Dover advocate refugee-style camps like we see in the third world with tents erected in their backyards? They just won't want that.
Well, it's got to be a contained area. It's got to be a contained area to then we've got to send them back to France.
Oh my goodness. A contained area. Is she suggesting some sort of concentration of asylum seekers? So an encampment that is concentrated? Is this the road we're going down? Really? Look, when people arrive in the country, their claim has to be processed. They have to be provided basic accommodation. They have been, up to this stage, been offered basic accommodation. The right wing and GB News and others keep talking about 5-star hotels and stuff like that, which is absolute tripe. They're not put in 5-star hotels. They're put in ex-hotels, basic accommodation, a number of people per room in some cases, very basic food. They're given a few quid in order to get by. They have their meals paid for them. They're given some services. They're given some material because they're not allowed to work. A lot of them would like to work, but they're not allowed to work. So they have to survive. They have to be provided food and board. But it would be a breach of UN conventions to put them up in tents. Now, when Andrea and others talk about, well, in France they're in tents. Yes, but this is not the French authorities putting them up in tents. In many cases, they're in these transit camps or in these tents because they're waiting to cross the channel. It's not a permanent situation. They're not in France in a tent waiting for their claim to be processed. The French government is not doing that. But Andrea Jenkins seems to be advocating for such a position.
We've got to start sending. My whole point is we've got to send them back to France, Camilla. They shouldn't be coming over the first place from a safe.
This is a Brexiteer. It would have been easier to send people back to France or to other countries in Europe if the UK was still a member of the European Union. But Andrea campaigned and still advocates for Brexit. So she has made it more difficult to achieve her goal.
Is your tent idea your idea, or has it been endorsed by the party? Because Reform sort of distanced themselves from this.
Yeah, no, it's my idea. Of course it is, yeah. No, Camilla, I've always been a politician who...
Okay, it's her idea. She's dumb enough to say, look, it's not Reform's idea, it's my idea. She actually thinks it's such a good idea that she's claiming ownership of it, as opposed to, distancing herself and say, look, this is something that Reform has been pushing as well. But she actually thinks it's a good idea. She's not clever enough to realize it's a stupid idea. Once again, when it comes to asylum seekers in hotels or ex-hotels or in some sort of accommodation, it is somewhat out of sight, out of mind. Not enough for many people on the far right, but just picture a field next to a town or a park or something like that, full of tents. How long do you think before the local community would protest over it? How long do you think it would take for people to march on City Hall or wherever Andrea Jenkins will be residing, demanding its removal? I think it would last probably a couple of days. And then Andrea Jenkins would have to do something about it. But she won't be able to do much about it if she's asking for it to be built in Dover.